Welcome to flipped video number 6. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the immigrants that have made it to the United States and what kind of travel they experienced and what they faced once they got here. So prior to the Civil War, the majority of the immigrants were from Ireland and Germany. And then the number of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, they came after the Civil War. So there were two waves of immigrants. The first wave is Ireland and Germany. You're looking at potato famine. And then the number of immigrants from Southern and Eastern Europe, this drastically increased. All right. So we're beginning to see a large group of people that don't speak the same language, that have different religious beliefs, and look different. So they came for a variety of different reasons. Okay, so really important to remember is the push and the pull factor. Something made them leave and something brought them here. So your push factor is what makes people leave. So why did they leave the country of origin? Well, the push factors could be things like war, famine, persecution. Okay, so they're leaving because home is not a great place to live anymore. What brings them to America is things like economic opportunity and religious freedom. A lot of that persecution that was in their homeland, it doesn't exist in the United States. There's definitely persecution, but it's nothing like what they were dealing with. Much like the refugees that came from Syria, they're fleeing a war-torn nation. This is a lot of what you're seeing that's coming after the Civil War to the United States. So immigrant experience, they vary greatly. However, there were common themes. There was a tough decision to leave home and family, a hard and costly journey with an uncertain end, and difficulties of learning a new language and adjusting to a foreign culture. So the decision to leave home is not an easy one. Okay, it's going to be a very uncertain journey, and they don't necessarily have anybody on the other end, but they know they're going for what they believe is a better life. So in spite of the difficult road in front of them, many immigrants were optimistic that moving to America was going to give them a better life. So it was a big journey. So immigrants needed funds to travel and to make a new start, and many only had the funds to travel. So they only had enough money to get them to America. They didn't have enough money once they got here. They were that desperate. Many brought only what they could carry. Like I said, they're coming from war-torn countries, so they could only carry what's on their back. A lot of times, they were lucky to just get out alive. They were walking out of the country, just managing to get on a ship. Most traveled in crowded steerage with no privacy and often seasickness. So your privacy in these places was going to be like a curtain that you could hang up to hide yourself from everybody else. They shoved in as many people as they possibly could. It wasn't a sanitary place. There wasn't a whole lot of bathrooms. It was really hard to get fresh water. So the journey was not an easy journey. And then they got to America. So they would come in one of two places, Ellis Island or Angel Island. So Ellis Island is in New York City. It was one of the first stops for immigrants. This is the one that most of you have probably heard about. It's where the Statue of Liberty's at. So first and second class passengers, they're processed right on the ship. And then the rest were sent to Ellis Island. So if you could afford a nice ticket with a nice cabin, you got to be processed right there on the ship and you got to be let off. But if you were your typical immigrant that, it took everything that they had just to get here, they had to go to Ellis Island, and it would often take several hours to get them through processing. Then you have Angel Island. Angel Island is in San Francisco. It's mostly Asian immigrants who came to work in the mines and on the railroads. And for them, it often took weeks or months for processing. And a little bit later, we're going to discuss why that was. So passenger manifests, such as this one, often tracked vital information of the immigrants who entered the U.S. ports to begin their lives. So things like their names, their religious beliefs, their profession, where they were going, all sorts of things would be kept on these manifests. And these are the kind of things that you would find in an archive somewhere. So there were some challenging issues that they had to face. Once they were in America, immigrants immediately faced the tough decision, such as where to settle and how to find work. Like I said, a lot of them came with only enough money to get here. Most had to learn a new language and new custom, and many agents took advantage of this newcomers. So there were people that were waiting for these newcomers on the dock just to scam them, right? So that they can make money off of them. Because these guys didn't speak a lot of English, so a lot of people couldn't communicate with them very well. And so a lot of people got in trouble that way. So many new immigrants stayed in cities close to factories and jobs. You know, just like New York City. A lot of them didn't leave New York City. Others went for other major cities that were in the area, like Boston or Philadelphia, that were not too hard of a travel away, that had a lot of manufacturing in them. They would live in ethnic neighborhoods with people who shared their same language, religion, and culture. Okay, so when you think about big cities, oftentimes you hear about places like Chinatown and Little Italy, right? The Five Points District was Irish in New York. Okay, so in these ethnic neighborhoods, they got together volunteer groups that would help them learn how to speak English and teach them American customs and dress. Because if they didn't, they had a harder time finding a job, because the employers at the factories, they're not going to bother to learn all these different languages. They're just going to hire the people that they can communicate with. And this is called Americanization. Okay, and this is going to be a big thing that I'm going to talk about a lot. You're going to hear me talk about this so much, because when immigrants would come to America, and we did this to Native Americans as well, if we want you to fit in, you know, we kind of make you. You have to dress like the rest. You have to speak like the rest. All right. And this really applied to the immigrants coming into America. Fortunately, these immigrant groups often had their own fraternal orders to help provide social and financial services. And you still see some of these orders around today. And the children would often become more Americanized. So they would speak primarily English. Instead of it being their second language, it would be their first language. Unfortunately, new immigrants, they faced a lot of hostility. So many immigrants faced what's called nativism, and that's a tendency to prefer native-born white Americans. All right, so the first wave of immigrants looked and sounded pretty similar to the rest of us. But the second wave of immigrants, they all spoke a different language, and they dressed different. So they kind of freaked people out. And I don't know why, because America's a melting pot, but people have a tendency to be afraid of what they don't know, what they don't understand. And so because of this preference of nativism, there was a result of heavy competition for jobs and for housing. So immigrants would work for lower wages just to get work. Foreign culture scared Americans, and they were suspicious of immigrants. So Americans did not trust Catholics because they felt their loyalty to the Pope would be stronger than their loyalty to America. In fact, America did not elect a Catholic president until John F. Kennedy, and even then it was a really big deal because people worried that he would be more loyal to the Pope. So there were some policies that restricted immigration. Because of all of this competition for jobs and all of this fear, they had some problems. So the Chinese Exclusion Act was one of them. And so Congress passed it in 1882, and it prohibited immigration of Chinese laborers. Okay, so they're flooding in to San Francisco. There's not as many jobs in San Francisco. It's mostly in mining. It's mostly in railroads. Okay, so there's a limited amount of jobs. And so the way that they're trying to curb this is they say, hey, look, unless you have family here or you have a sellable trade, you're not supposed to be here. Okay, so they would restrict their rights, and they would not be allowed to become naturalized. So if a immigrant becomes naturalized, that's their first step to becoming an actual citizen. Okay, so this was the beginning of legislation that would end up restricting immigration. And this Exclusion Act, if you remember, Angel Island, we talked about how it sometimes take weeks for them to process the immigrants. They would need somebody to come claim them to take them off of Angel Island so that they can go to work. All right, so remember, they need to have family or a trade, so they needed somebody to come get them off of Angel Island. Many immigrants lived together in tenement houses after they first arrived to the United States. Tenement housing meant that a lot of people lived in one small space. We're going to talk a lot about this a little bit later. So if you look at this Asian family here in the picture, all of these people lived in one home. And there's a lot in that picture. So despite anti-immigrant sentiment, immigrants of many racial and ethnic groups transformed American society. So even though we were a little bit afraid, we still ended up adopting so much more, because America really truly is a melting pot. We're made up of all different ethnicities. So they fueled industrial growth, they acquired citizenship, participated in the democratic process, and made their traditions part of American culture. So immigrants really became what America is today. It's I think of our American history as a quilt, and every piece, every patch makes up this greater beautiful quilt, right? And immigrants really are a lot of those patches that make up who we are as Americans. So immigrants not only helped to propel American economic engine and made it an economic powerhouse, but they helped shape American culture as well. They brought their language, customs, religion, and food. Many immigrants made valuable contributions to American culture. Andrew Carnegie is a Scottish immigrant, and he donated millions. Canadian James Naismith invented the game of basketball. Nikola Tesla of Croatia pioneered discoveries and transmission of electricity. So immigrants put so much of who they are. And then there's just simple things like food. So they have contributed the hot dog. Hot dog came from Germany. Tortillas come from Mexico. Bagels come from Eastern Europe. Pierogies come from Eastern Europe. For those of you who don't know what pierogies are, these delightful little potato dumplings with meat in them. Oh my goodness, really, really good. Sushi comes from Japan, and hummus comes from Middle East. How many of you have eaten any of these foods in the last week? And this is just part of our American diet, right? So the immigrants that have come, even though they faced a lot of persecution, they really made up who America is.